Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we need.
Take it away, Harvey.
Hey, everybody. This is Harvey Sluggo Wasserman on July 11th, 2020, our 101st Green Grassroots Emergency Election Protection Coalition call. We are glad to see everybody. We've got 43 people on the call to start. We're going to start today's Zoom with a report from England from Deepa Driver, who is close to the defense for the great Julian Assange. There's lots of stuff coming up about that, and we will let Deepa lead us through that. I want to thank Wendy Lederman, who's joining us for bringing Deepa into the fold here. We are then going to have a brief moment with Pete Pekarsky, who is running for the U.S. Senate in Wisconsin and who has a report on an attempt to be included, not only he, but a number of other candidates to be included in the televised debate for the U.S. Senate seat in Wisconsin, which is very much in play, thank God. And then at 5:30 or thereabouts, maybe, or maybe a little earlier, I'm not sure, we're going to be joined by Dennis Bernstein, the great host of the nationally syndicated Flashpoint show, which originates at KPFA in Berkeley, San Francisco. And we're going to go into a deep, deep discussion on the Roe v. Wade situation. Dennis wrote a book way back when about Henry Hyde, who was a congressperson from Illinois who got through Congress a law forbidding the use of federal funds for abortion. And it was really the opening salvo against Roe v. Wade. And Dennis is incredibly knowledgeable about this, and we're going to follow with a deep discussion of the other liberties that are at risk given the nature of this horrendous Supreme Court. I will say, I stumbled across a letter that I had published in the New York Times in 1991, in the middle of the Clarence Thomas hearings. I sent it to you, Steve. I don't know if it's posted. This is back when the letter was 7 or 8 paragraphs long, and it was posted in the letters section of the paper edition. Well, there was no online edition of the New York Times at the time. So if we can post it, it was very interesting because at the time of the Clarence Thomas nomination, it was all about Anita Hill and the accusations of his sexual predation. And the gist of my letter was, look, it's all well and good to have this discussion about his sexual predation, but the question is, can he serve as a Supreme Court justice? And in the letter, it said basically that he obviously cannot, Clarence Thomas cannot be a fair and honest and balanced Supreme Court justice because he's so clearly bitter about everything that's gone on here. So there's the letter. Steve, if you'll post it at the, if you'll post it at the website and put in a link, people can read it if they're interested. This is in 1991. Clarence Thomas was clearly going to be a catastrophe as a Supreme Court justice. And, everybody was all preoccupied with the sexual harassment thing, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was that this guy was completely unqualified and a bitter, angry, fascistic person who had no business being on the Supreme Court. So people might find that interesting. In the second hour, after the great Dennis Bernstein has joined us, after our lengthy discussion of Roe v. Wade and where it's going with the destruction of our privacy and our civil liberties and all the other stuff from the Supreme Court, in the second hour, we're going to get into Diablo Canyon and nuclear power. It appears that the governor and the legislature in California are about to wipe out any and all regulation of the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, which is absolutely terrifying, beyond terrifying. I mean, this plant is surrounded by earthquake faults, the whole 9 yards. So after 6 o'clock Eastern time, and Dennis has joined us, I hope that we will have a major discussion beginning to plot out a strategy to get Diablo Canyon shut as it's scheduled to get shut in 24 and 25, if not earlier. So that's the basic lineup. We have Deepa Driver on Julian Assange, Pete Pekarsky briefly on Wisconsin, and we can go to town with Dennis Bernstein at 5:30 or earlier. So let's start. Deepa Driver, can we get you unmuted? We have 61 people waiting to hear your genius on what is happening with Julian Assange, and we're all really well. We really hope justice is done here. So, Deepa Driver, can you talk to us about Julian Assange, please, from London, England? Thank you again, Wendy, for bringing you on board.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you. I guess perhaps I should just quickly introduce myself and say how I'm connected to the case. Like many of you, I was interested in WikiLeaks in the background some 15 years ago, or maybe longer than that, actually. And when WikiLeaks began to make the releases of the Iraq war logs and the Afghan war diaries and Guantanamo briefs, detainee assessment briefs, like many people, I paid attention, but I didn't really understand how revolutionary WikiLeaks was in what it was doing. And for those of you who are not that close to WikiLeaks, what's really important about WikiLeaks was a change in the way journalism works, essentially allowing for, before the internet age, we had large volumes of data, as Mr. Wasserman just showed, which were available in hard copy. And if you think back to the Pentagon Papers and the way the documents, Daniel Ellsberg photocopied them overnight with the help of his young son, things changed when things went electronic. We had access to large volumes of data. While there were whistleblowers already talking to journalists in the past, the volume of information that whistleblowers were able to give to journalists now was on an entirely different scale. WikiLeaks bridged that technology gap between traditional journalism and modern journalism by allowing whistleblowers to talk to journalists in a secure way, secure not just for the whistleblower in protecting their identity, but also secure for us as members of the public, because WikiLeaks had, and this is one of the biggest smears against WikiLeaks, that they dump data, which is completely untrue. WikiLeaks spent a lot of time looking at the data, ensuring with the help of experts like John Sloboda at Iraq Body Count or Andy Worthington, who worked on the Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs, to make sure that the information was accurate. And it is that for that reason that to this day, WikiLeaks has a 100% track record of accuracy. WikiLeaks also changed journalism because it allowed us to see the reality for what it is, rather than through the sometimes the rose-tinted glasses, but also sometimes just the pressures of commercialism, the pressures of having an oligopolist-controlled media, and the range of discourse that WikiLeaks allowed us to understand was completely disproportionate to what we had seen before. Why was this important? So, for example, if you think of the iconic WikiLeaks video, which is known as Collateral Murder, you can, if you haven't seen it before, I recommend that you watch the version on collateralmurder.wikileaks.org. The third link down is with one of the soldiers who was on the ground when the killings happened. And this video documents shootings on the street of Iraq. And not only were these shootings of unarmed civilians, they also attacked children as young as 4. And while doing so, it was almost like they were playing the soldiers in the Apache helicopter gunship, shooting down at unarmed civilians, were playing some kind of video game. And it is because of the things like the Collateral Murder video and the Guantanamo Bay detainee assessment briefs that Julian Assange now sits in Belmarsh prison in London. what's special about that collateral murder video is that there was a Washington Post journalist embedded within the very battalion when the collateral murder took place. But he, and I think this is a problem with embedded journalists, he felt compelled to find some kind of excuses for the soldiers' behavior. And it wasn't until the WikiLeaks release of that video that we understood the complete picture. So there is a huge amount of censorship in the media, but there is also a huge amount of self-censorship by journalists who get most of their stories from the national security establishment. And it is this that WikiLeaks helped to change. What was also important about WikiLeaks was that they weren't just doing national security reporting, although that's what they're quite well known for. If you care about causes such as the climate, for example, they released information about Trafigura's toxic waste dumping on the Ivory Coast. They released vast amounts of information about corruption in Arab Moist Kenya. They released information that helped spark the Arab Spring in Tunisia. And it is all this information that helped do one very important thing, that allowed the media to work in the public interest, so that for the first time, instead of the state surveilling us, we, the public, the citizens who paid for the state and these corporations, were able to understand what was really happening behind closed doors. What deals were really being struck when they told us they were worried about our safety. What was really, the unvarnished truth, which we could then look at and compare with archived data, look at and compare with information that was released, for example, through freedom of information requests, or indeed declassified information, to understand the real big picture. And so WikiLeaks was quite important in developing scientific journalism, which is really fascinating. Now, coming back to my story, which is, I didn't understand most of this, but I knew that WikiLeaks was important, and I knew that Julian's work was important because this was a very small organization, and despite being smeared and tainted, they were saying no to a very powerful force, which is the American state, who wanted to hide evidence of serious war crimes in other parts of the world. And it's very different from The Guardian or the New York Times or the Washington Post. The Guardian, for example, in the UK is within a committee where editors actually share national security stories with our defense authorities, and they make decisions on whether information should be released to the public. And this corruption of the media is something that WikiLeaks helped to redress, and gave us a sense that you could be small and you could be courageous. You could be small and you could take on the might of the CIA and the FBI. And this was something new and revolutionary. And as Julian's often said, courage is contagious. And a lot of people, I guess, on the other side of the arguments were concerned that Julian's courage would be emulated by other journalists elsewhere. And that's why they tried to shut him down. And I began to pay attention when they dragged Julian out of the embassy. And most of us will remember that image of this man, this bearded man, unshaven, looking really uncouth, being dragged out by burly policemen. And it's very important to remember that when Julian was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, it was completely in breach of international law, i.e., there are situations where, countries deprive somebody of citizenship or remove somebody's asylum, and then these people are handed over. Obviously, they're not to be handed over to states that might then torture them. But in this case, neither was Julian's Ecuadorian citizenship removed, nor was he formally put through the process to remove asylum. Instead, a secret deal was hatched between Lenin Moreno, the British, Alan Duncan at this end, and the Americans to extract Julian out of the embassy in exchange for a £4.2 billion IMF loan. A lot of this is documented in Alan Duncan's memoirs, which have come out recently in something called Operation Pelican.
Deepa, let me jump in. A number of people have joined us. We're up to 78 people. This is Deepa Driver. She's speaking to us from England. She's with the Julian Assange defense team, explaining very beautifully. I will say, Deepa, if you had not been so articulate, we would have cut you off a long time ago. So you're doing really very well. We appreciate it. About 30 people have joined since you started. So Deepa is going to be talking another 10 or so minutes about the Julian Assange situation. We'll have some brief questions, a brief note from Pete Pekarsky, and then we're going to go to Dennis Bernstein, who's on the line with us. So go ahead, Deepa, continue, please.
Sure, and I'm sorry, just feel free to cut me off when you need me to stop.
You're doing great.
Thank you. When Julian was dragged out of the embassy, that's when I began to pay attention. I'm a trade unionist and an academic in the UK. I teach financial regulation, which has very little to do with much of WikiLeaks' releases, although I'm interested in the transatlantic trade partnerships kind of information which comes out of it. And I began to pay attention, began to realize that, began to attend meetings here, and began to realize that ordinary people really didn't understand what was going on in the case, but understood that this man was being stitched up. And there were a bunch of people here who were interested, and I took it upon myself to organize a public event. I'm also a member of the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers here in Britain. It's a 100-year-old society with the number of notables within its vice presidents, and I'm a member of its executive. And I became the legal observer in Julian's case on behalf of the society. So I'm not actually part of the defense team or the campaigning arm, so to speak, but I've been watching how due process has been denied in Julian's case over the last years.
Yes, and can you tell us then exactly where is the case now and how we can help with Julian's defense?
Certainly. In the last 3 years, what I've seen is quite unusual. It is unusual for an extraditing state to have spied extensively upon the defendant and his privileged legal conversations. It is unusual for, and you can see some of these conversations on YouTube. So it's publicly available, and there is a court case going on in Spain at the moment in relation to that. It's unusual for an extraditing state, in this case the US, to have been to be known to have plotted to kill the defendant. And 30 US government insiders have confirmed that the United States under Michael Pompeo's leadership sought to murder, not just murder Julian Assange, poison him, but also potentially engage in a shootout on the streets of Knightsbridge, which is one of the posh areas of London. It's also very unusual that we find out from the FBI's key prosecution witness, Sigurdur Ingi Thordarson, who's an Icelandic national, that he has recanted his testimony. He's a serial pedophile and fraudster, convicted, who has confirmed that he provided testimony against Julian Assange in exchange for certain arrangements with the FBI. And he's recanted his testimony. And the case still goes on. What's also interesting is the serious conflict of interest that we've discovered in relation to the judiciary in this case. What's really worrying is that this entire process of extradition is a very unbalanced process, in that the presumption is in favor of extradition. So there is no, on the balance of probabilities or beyond reasonable doubt, we know that Julian Assange is guilty. The presumption is he will be extradited, and that's how the process worked. Yet at the first instance in the lowest courts, despite a number of objections, the one objection that the judge upheld in Julian Assange's favor was that Julian's mental health was so fragile that he was not in a position to be extradited to the United States, particularly given the state of the medical conditions in the prisons there, and the fact that he might have been held under special administrative measures, which are known as the darkest corner of the world. Now, at that stage, we thought Julian would be released so he could be out on bail, at least while the US contested this. It was very strange to find that despite winning his case, Julian was not released. Instead, the case continued, and the United States argued that they had not been allowed to put in what are called additional assurances, which were not tested by the lower court. And this allowed them to say, oh yeah, we can look after him when he's in the US. So, and these assurances are absolutely not worth the paper they're written on, as Amnesty International says, because essentially the US can withdraw these assurances at any point, and they have done in other cases.
So how do we now jump in to help with this case?
Well, I guess there are many things that people can do. If you're somebody who's not able to leave the home, what you could do is put a little sign in your window, talk to your friends and relatives, maybe over the phone or via Zoom, and explain what the case is about. The case has gone on for 10 years. Very few people really understand what's going on with the case. People like me are willing to come and talk to your friends and colleagues about it. So if you can organize something, that would be great. If you're able to organize meetings in your area, public meetings within your trade union group, your local church, your local community group, your local branch of whatever peace group you're part of, or any socialist activities you're doing, or even free speech activities you're doing, this is a good place, maybe at your university, maybe student group, whatever else. Alternatively, you could also do other things. There are people who are contributing financially to Julian's defense. There are others who are contributing in terms of helping with, they're behind the scenes, maybe they're former lawyers, they are former civil servants. They're trying to use their resources to help change the narrative. And I think the most important thing you can do is educate yourself about the case, because unless you understand the case, you will fall for many of the smears which seem so plausible about Julian, and which are often very untrue and have been weaponized to destroy all support for him.
Okay, well, will you put in the chat, please, the places that people can contact? I assume we need to pressure the American government to stop this nonsense. The British government, the Germans have come out very strongly in support of him. And so we need to know, put in the chat, please, exactly where you want us to direct our pressure. Ruth Strauss has a question for you. Ruth, go ahead, Ruth Strauss, Dr. Ruth, and then Dorothy Wright.
Yeah.
And we have 8 minutes left in this section.
Okay, a couple of things. Number one, for everybody on this meeting, you must show people the collateral murder video, and do that at the beginning of anything that you talk to people about, because once you see that video, then you know what the crimes were of us, and that they were shooting, Reuters journalists and people, and acting like it was, a video game, which it obviously was to them. And if you see that video, then it just solidifies why it is so important what Julian did. And you can tell.
If we can put the link to that video in the chat, Deepa or Ruth, if either of you have it, please put it in.
I have a couple of other things. I have a couple of other things.
Okay, real quick, Ruth.
Okay, the second thing is people can go to the store that's linked with Julian, and you can get T-shirts, masks, etc. So that's another way to advertise and support. Finally, thank you so much. I've kept up with this for a long time. What was the thing that you talked about a large amount of money in order, being swapped for him?
Deepa?
You said something about the embassy.
So,
oh yeah,
there's an IMF loan to Ecuador that was provided, which is about 4.2 billion, and a subsequent tranche was also made. And it has been argued that this was in exchange for getting Julian out of the embassy, for Ecuador depriving him of asylum. And it's quite interesting in terms of Lenin Moreno at the time saying that Julian was smearing feces on the wall and making absolutely outrageous claims about Julian torturing his cat, and others, others around him making these claims, which were completely untrue. So that the 4.2 billion refers to that IMF loan.
Okay, I just have one other thing to say, because you're the easiest person to get to. I'm a cardiologist. I was extremely concerned about this quote unquote mini stroke, which there's no such thing as a mini stroke. And I know that it can be caused by rhythm disturbances, etc. I did write Stella and people here that were in contact to offer my opinion or review of records or whatever, because I highly doubt that he's getting you know, the kind of medical care that he should. And when people have a mini stroke, they're bound to have another one later. Thank you.
Thank you.
So if you want to
Deepa,
get in touch with me, Harvey has my email. Thank you.
Deepa, Dr. Ruth is a cardiologist. Dorothy Reich, please, Dorothy Reich.
Yeah, I was just going to say quickly that about the store, that there's a lot of good stuff there, but the thing I liked best was a T-shirt that said 1984 is not an instruction manual. And I bought that T-shirt, and I think everybody should get that.
That's a
So
good one.
I've been
Thank you very
following this
much.
since Chelsea Manning and Julian were first, accused of telling the truth. Always a
Well, it's
crime in the United
outrageous.
States.
Deepa, your history on WikiLeaks I found very, very interesting, and it really puts the case in context. Julian Assange, someone says that he released Russian DNC emails to help Trump. We don't know about that. And Joel Block, thank you for that comment. But you know, the bottom line is the WikiLeaks did change the journalistic landscape, and you know, and I'm sure that the powers that be have never forgiven him for that, and this is retribution. We do have. I want to note we have Ray McClendon on the line from Atlanta Georgia NAACP now. And also Dennis Bernstein, you're with us, Dennis? Do you want to unmute Dennis Bernstein?
Deepa wanted to make a response real quick.
Oh, Deepa, go ahead, and then Wendy Lederman. Wendy, you're in the dark there, but we can see you, so go ahead. But Deepa and then Wendy.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to Joel Block's comment about Russian stolen DNC emails. Well, if you look at the information from CrowdStrike CEO, it's very clear that there is no evidence to prove that. And I won't go into the detail here, but there is plenty of evidence to show that this Russiagate smear is one that is really important in order to destroy Julian. But what's really important to understand is the reason Trump came to power was because Hillary colluded with the DNC to stitch up Bernie Sanders. And it is important for those on the left and those within the Democratic Party to understand that it is really important that internal democratic processes are not sabotaged in this way. That is what dilutes the Democratic Party, and that's what leads to people like Trump getting elected, because you cannot have faith in the processes within left parties.
Okay, good. Thank you for that, Deepa. Wendy Lederman, and then we're going to, I don't see Pete Pekarsky on the line. So Joel Bernstein is up next, but go ahead, Wendy.
Thank you so much. I'll try to be quick. Deepa, thank you so very much for being with us. We're so enjoying this, and hopefully maybe you can come back again in the future, because I know there's so much with Gitmo and then the implications for other professionals. So it would really be great to have you with that. And I appreciate you bringing up the point about the sabotage of Bernie Sanders, because a lot of people in America, the progressives, get blamed for Trump when the DNC wants nothing more but to keep the monopoly of the two parties instead of having the progressives. I was just going to say, because we have a lot of people in the line that are with other parts of the press. So if anybody wants Deepa maybe to speak, I'm kind of volunteering you, but maybe let me know and I can get a hold of Deepa, or if Deepa has contacts she wants to put in the chat. But I'm sure everybody would love to connect with you. And we just appreciate you so much. I know it's late where you are. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepa. We have a hand from Paul Heller. Paul Heller, did you want to jump in?
Where is Assange now?
Go to, Dennis.
Where is Assange now, and what process is taking place now, and what's its deadline?
Deepa?
Sure. Julian's still in Belmarsh maximum security prison. Because of the problems with the criminal justice system here, most prisoners in the prison are on lockdown 22 hours a day, sometimes, especially during the COVID pandemic, which means that he is in effective solitary confinement most of the time, or has been for the last couple of years. But he, as I think Ruth said earlier, he had a mini stroke, what we call the trans-ischemic attack. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which means 10 years of torture, 10 years of being held indoors, 10 years of being held without sunlight is bad for anyone. And we don't know what Julian's long-term prognosis is, given he has suffered so much. So it's really important that this punishment process, which is appeal after appeal after appeal, either here at the European Court of Human Rights or in the US, doesn't continue as a way of silencing a journalist. If this happened, if Russia silenced a journalist or China silenced a journalist in this way and held a political prisoner, we would all be up in arms. And I urge you to use that same kind of scrutiny for your country, because that's what they're doing. They're causing Julian Assange to be a political prisoner in Britain, and Britain is complicit. So are Australia, Ecuador, and Sweden. And we need to stop this, because it's only if you write to your representatives, it's only if you make your voice known, that things can change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve.
If anybody wants to be in touch, Wendy's got my details, and I'm very happy to attend small groups or large to share the information. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. Put your contacts in the chat. You're extremely well spoken. That was a very beautiful presentation. I learned a lot. I hope everybody else did too. We have 84 people with us. Connie Klein from Ohio has just joined us, one of the great safe energy warriors. And we have Dennis Bernstein about to join us. Dennis, are you with us?
I am here. How are you doing, everybody?
Dennis, you've done a lot of great coverage on Julian Assange. I don't know if you've been in touch with Deepa Driver, but of course, as one of our country's leading journalists, broadcast journalists, it's very up your alley. Any of us who've been journalists well understand that there but for fortune go any of us. So we are now going to switch. Dennis Bernstein is the host of the Flashpoint show. It originates at KPFA in Berkeley and is nationally syndicated on the Pacifica Network. Dennis, many moons ago, did tremendous work on Henry Hyde. And I have yet to see Henry Hyde's name in any of this stuff, the discussions of the repeal of Roe v. Wade. He's an important figure, and Dennis has tremendous unique perspective on the situation. We're going to take his opening salvo and have a broader discussion on the implications of what the Supreme Court is doing in Roe and beyond. We have 87 people with us, and Dennis, take it away, please.
Thanks, Harvard. I really just take a few minutes, and obviously the larger discussion is crucial. But I have to say that I became extremely alarmed at the point at which essentially this country has freed the anti-abortionists to be vigilantes and gave them AR-15s to do it with. I tracked this movement, and Henry Hyde in particular. I actually, in the late 1990s, I was on an investigation of Henry Hyde and his illegal, Henry Hyde, very interesting guy. I'm sure anybody over 40 probably remembers this dude. He was sort of portrayed as some combination of Clarence Darrow, Mother Teresa, and whoever you want, Socrates. He was the Judiciary Chairman. He was the guy who was slotted to investigate Bill Clinton for his indiscretions, his sexual indiscretions. And Henry Hyde, I had been investigating him, Mr. Rule of Law, because he was engaged with Ronald Reagan. After the Congress cut off aid to the Contras, Henry Hyde became a key player behind the scenes in figuring out ways to illegally arm the Contras. And one of the things that happened at that time, and it was very interesting that it happened, was the deregulation of the SNLs. And all of a sudden there was like, sort of like a scramble for various corrupt business people to do whatever they wanted to these formerly 9 to 3 SNLs that were built for people to get small loans to open businesses or buy their houses. Well, one of the things that Henry Hyde was doing at the time was trying to utilize these SNLs to secretly fund the Contras outside of the Bolin Amendment. The Contras were cut off because they were shown to be terrorists, the people that Reagan called the moral equivalent of the founding fathers. Maybe they were, I don't know, because I'm having some doubts about the founding fathers. But in any event, Henry Hyde, just this as a backdrop. Well, let me read you something here. This is Henry Hyde. Remember, this is when he was beginning to prosecute the Mr. Clinton. And so one of the things we started with in terms of the investigation, remember Henry Hyde back to the Hyde Amendment, cutting off all federal aid for essentially anything related in any way, shape, or form to pro-choice, right to choose, abortion, you name it. He was cutting off federal aid for it. That was Henry Hyde. And so Henry Hyde started the prosecution of Clinton, and he began giving a series of moral outbursts about how disgusting it was for a president to engage in this. Soon after, a woman by the name of Sherry Hancock became very frustrated and indignant. It seems that Sherry Hancock, Hyde went to church on Sunday, but Saturday nights he spent with his girlfriend, Sherry Hancock. And Sherry Hancock, after one too many pompous diatribes by Henry Hyde, wanted to speak publicly. And she found out that myself and Leslie Kane were doing a book on Henry Hyde. So she wanted to know if we were interested in what he did on Saturday nights. And I don't know if any of you remember this, but the guy was a freaking brute. I just point that out because this is the same guy, and this is where I'm going to come in seriously. The consistency in terms of the extreme right is they sort of profess an extreme devotion to law and order, the rule of law, except when the rule of law goes against their own policies. Henry Hyde, this is when he was, we caught Henry Hyde coming out of the trial of Joseph Scheidler. Does anybody remember Joseph Scheidler? One of his proud events was in 1986. He and a bunch of hoodlums attacked a pro-choice center, an abortion available center in Pensacola, Florida. They began by throwing the executive director down the stairs. They tore the place up. They destroyed people. They threatened people in the middle of treatment. Hyde shows up at this guy's trial. It was a campaign stop in support of Joseph Scheidler, who was clearly a terrorist. And now Scheidler, you may remember, started a group called Pro-Life Action Network, PLAN. And he brought into the fore a guy by the name of Randall Terry. You remember Operation Rescue? Now, these folks at the time, you remember that doctors began to get, abortion doctors were attacked, they were threatened, their houses were surrounded, and several were assassinated. We all remember this. Now, it is interesting, just as an aside, I saw that Clarence Thomas was complaining about the protests that were taking place by his house and how it was upsetting, the order and their ability to freely come and go. And, this was not acceptable in terms of American behavior. So while Clarence Thomas led the charge against Roe and freed the AR-15, he's a little troubled that he's having his personal life upset by these protests. That might be an indication of what needs to come next in terms of expanding protests. But in any event, you have on any number of occasions, and I'll finish it here because I wrote this book 25 years ago. It's called Henry Hyde's Moral Universe. And as I said, it started off as a book about foreign policy. This is a man, see, again, the parallels are terrifying. Henry Hyde supported a program, you might remember this, during the battle around the Contras, whether they were freedom fighters or killers. There was a plan discovered. It was sort of conjured by Oliver North and others in the White House under the supervision of Vice President George Bush. It was a plan to declare martial law because we all understood back then that the Contras were just about to come over the US southern border, and we needed a secret program. We needed to be ready to declare martial law, to do whatever we needed to do to turn the clock back on the Sandinistas, right? So there was a plan created for martial law. You also may remember that there was a plan in the Reagan White House to allow the all US national security agencies to do business, to work with, to turn a blind eye to drug smugglers if in the name of national security, it was supporting the Contra operation. Thank you, Henry Hyde, for support on that as well. So my point here is, oh, and that plan also included a plan to kill the US ambassador in Costa Rica, blame it on the Nicaraguans, and use it as an excuse to attack Nicaragua. Let me say that again. Kill the US ambassador and use it as an excuse to attack Nicaragua. Now, the United States has done things like this in the past. So Henry Hyde, I guess he liked that plan too. The point is, where we are now, we got a group of people, it's their order, and they decide when and if a law is going to be accepted and to be enforced. That's where we are now. And it started out with these right-wingers like Henry Hyde, who was literally willing to overlook the fact that Oliver North helped to create, again, a plan of martial law in the United States to defend the Contras. And, you know, it goes on and on. So there's a history, a clear history of these generations of these folks, really led by the anti-abortionists, willing to do anything and everything in the name of protecting the unborn. So, you know, the book is, you know, not available in any bookstore, but it's around, I guess, on the internet. We've got extensive material on the Hyde Amendment, the way it came to be, the various things that led up to it, and the kinds of people who were hurt by it. I guess maybe I should end there with.
Well, Dennis, that was tremendous. Thank you. I think Dennis.
Can I just say one more thing?
Of course, go ahead.
When the first casualty of the Hyde Amendment was Rosie Jimenez. Rosie Jimenez was going to school in 1977. She had one more year of college to go to graduate. She managed to get a $700 federal grant to finish her last year of college. And she got pregnant. And then she found out there was the Hyde Amendment. So she had to decide. She needed this money for college. She had to decide, what is she going to do? Is she going to spend this money on an abortion, or is she going to try and save some of it so she can finish her college degree? Well, she ended up getting a backroom abortion and ultimately died from it. And we're back there to square one. Thanks, Harv.
Thank you, Dennis. And I think we all have to remember that the Contras, who were the so-called freedom fighters, sponsored by the CIA in Nicaragua, were initially funded by arms sales, which were illegal to the Iranians, and also were the biggest runners of cocaine into the United States. And one of the great moments of pure hypocrisy, it doesn't get any more hypocritical than this, was Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan sitting on national TV telling everybody to say, just say no to drugs, when they were funding the Contras, who were bringing literally tons of cocaine into the United States and destabilizing the inner cities throughout the country. And if anybody wants to see an astonishing movie about this, you're going to be amazed who I'm going to recommend. It is a Tom Cruise movie. It's called American Made with Tom Cruise. And they completely lay out, as Danny Sheehan has testified, they completely lay out how the Contras that were supported by Henry Hyde, as Dennis has just showed, were destabilizing the entire country by bringing in tons of cocaine into the inner cities, while Ronald Reagan and Nancy were saying, just say no. And if you want to see another one, see the beginning of Narcos, the first episode of Narcos, where we meet Pablo Escobar, who was totally using the CIA to bring cocaine into the United States and winding up bringing hippopotamuses to Colombia. That's a whole other story. So,
Harv, can I add something to that, Harv?
Please,
there's a new movie. I think it's HBO or Showtime, in which it's a very sophisticated documentation of the relationship between these drug smugglers and the United States government. It's about the Contra drug smuggler, Gary Betzner. And just to be clear, after Dark Alliance was broken by Gary Webb, and he was discredited, unfortunately, and disrespected, the Central Intelligence Agency Inspector General did an investigation, and they found out there was a secret finding when Nancy Reagan was saying, just say no to drugs in one part of the White House, there was a secret finding signed by Ronald Reagan that literally allowed federal agents to turn a blind eye, to do business, to work with drug traffickers in the name of fighting for American democracy against Nicaragua. It's a fact.
Yes, and astounding. And it's no surprise that these are the people who are behind the anti-abortion movement. Those of you who never dreamed there would be a connection between running cocaine into the United States and the movement against abortion and the woman's right to choose, there you have it. And it's all in Dennis's research. He was the first one to look into Henry Hyde's insanity on this level. You couldn't make this stuff up, as we have repeatedly said. So now we're at the brink with Roe v. Wade, and we see that the court is very clear that it's going to try and turn back all our basic liberties and rights to privacy, starting with Roe v. Wade, of course. I want to very quickly go to Guido Reichstatter. Guido has been out demonstrating physically. Then we'll go to Ruth Strauss and Stephen Kaiser. But Guido is an invited guest. Guido, you have been doing civil disobedience to defend and protect a woman's right to choose. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I went up to Washington, D.C. earlier in May because I knew, as soon as I knew that the draft ruling was going to come down, that it would be necessary for there to be a strong popular response to it. And on June 6th, I locked myself to the fence in front of the Supreme Court. And then on the day that Roe was repealed, I climbed the Frederick Douglass Memorial Bridge and I was up there for about 28 hours without food or water, basically live streaming, trying to communicate with the American people, why it's so important for people to get out in the streets nonviolently, enter civil resistance, and force our government to act on abortion rights.
Well, good for you. And were you arrested? Were you sentenced? And were there others with you?
Yeah, of course I was arrested in both cases. That's the first time that I'd ever been arrested for anything really. But
So it's your bar mitzvah, mazel tov.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I encourage everybody who's able to, to get arrested and to join in civil resistance. Honestly, there's no reason why we should be waiting months, years, or generations to have nationally legalized abortion rights, when all it takes is massive numbers of people shutting down the capital city non-violently, for a couple of days or a couple of weeks until we force Congress to act. It's historically, that's the way that people around the world and countries around the world get the political change they need in the minimum time available to them.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And thank you for your bravery, your courage on there. Much appreciated. We're going to go to Ruth Strauss, Stephen Kaiser, and Donald Smith. We have 80 some people on the call. Go ahead, Ruth again, and then Stephen and Donald. And
Yeah.
Dennis, thank you, by the way, for that great presentation. It's much appreciated. For those of you, by the way, we are in about 10, 15 minutes at the most, going to segue over to a discussion on Diablo Canyon and nuclear power. Dennis, I hope you can stay with us, but we are in a crisis situation on the attempt to revive nuclear power plants, which is absolutely insane. Go ahead now, Ruth Strauss, please.
Oh, Dennis, thank you so much. I obviously knew about the Hyde Amendment. I didn't know about the relationship to the drugs, which I really appreciate your calling that to our attention. And I think probably everybody on this call, but in case not, knows about Dark Alliance, Gary Webb, and his breaking the story in the Mercury where he was supported, and then all the major outlets turned against him, and he ended up, in quotes, committing suicide.
Well, he died from 2 shots to the head.
That's right. That's right.
That's a new record. Sorry about that.
Right. Exactly. But the movie that I wanted to recommend, besides the 2 that you put out that I didn't know about, is Kill the Messenger, which is about him and his life and this whole story. And my favorite quote from the movie, he was walking down the street and a bunch of reporters were running after him, and they're going, "Is it true, Mr. Webb? Is it true that you believe in conspiracy theories?" And he turned around and he said, "I don't believe in conspiracy theories. I believe in conspiracies." So
there you go. Right on. Thank you for that, Ruth. Stephen Kaiser and Donald Smith.
I think you ought to point that the history of the CIA with drugs goes way back. I draw attention that we're talking about films to the film Air America starring Mel Gibson that came out many years ago. And I had a friend that was in Vietnam at that time, and he says he would witness every morning that the Air America planes would fly up full of weapons to Laos. And every evening they'd come back packed full of opium from Laos. So right. The CIA has used drugs as a big conduit. It raises a lot of money to do the covert things that they've done, including cocaine in Nicaragua, as Gary Webb pointed out. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Dennis, did you want to jump in? Dennis Bernstein? Dennis, you want to unmute?
I just wanted to make the obvious point, that wherever the US is prosecuting a foreign war, that will be the drug of choice in the United States. Right. We're working in Central America, it's going to be cocaine. We're invading Vietnam, it's going to be heroin. The opium flowed with the occupation in Afghanistan. It's just the nature of the sponsoring and the paying for off-the-shelf operations. Large sums of money, untraceable, as in what happened in '86. Congress cuts off aid, let's use the drugs.
Absolutely. Of course, when we invade Switzerland, there'll be a flood of LSD, but that's a different story. But Dennis, your reporting on this was fantastic. Many of the people here too young to remember Henry Hyde, but I'm glad you revised his foul memory. Stephen, Donald Smith, you had a hand, Donald Smith?
Yeah. So do I say Guido or Guido? Guaido's recommended, nonviolent resistance, a protest. My question is, maybe that worked in the 1960s for civil rights and to end the Vietnam War, but ever since then, it has arguably been ineffective. We protested against the war in Iraq, second war in Iraq. That was useless. We could have it, but the reason that maybe I'm afraid it's not effective is that the media only covers it if there's violence, and there always will be violence either from some small minority of extremists or by agent provocateur, or by right-wing provocateurs who make the violence. And of course, the media is going to say these are violent. So I'm not convinced that in this day and age, protests will work, because there'll be right-wing protesters protesting for Trump too. So it's a much more complicated world where I'm not certain that nonviolent. I'm not in favor of violent protests, but I'm not convinced that
Okay, well, you raise a good point, Donald. But remember one thing: in this day and age with the internet, we are the media. I mean, here's Guido on our call. We have 87 people, but 87 people is a lot who are actually paying attention and who are doing things. And we will be out on PRN, and we're live streaming. I think you raise a good point, but on the other hand, the media is very different now. And when a guy like Guido goes out and put his body on the line, we have a way of getting the word out now that we didn't before 30 years ago. So it's an interesting conundrum, but I believe the protests against the Iraq war had an impact. And, who knows what else they would have done had we not been out there marching. So it's a good point, but it's something worth discussing. Guido, I'll go to you on this.
Awesome.
Then, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I just want, that's a great question. And I just wanted to clear up a misconception that's really common. What we had with the massive protests against the Iraq war was largely, it was not civil resistance, right? Civil resistance means non-violently breaking the law, sitting in the streets, shutting down the capital city, absolutely non-violently, until the government is forced to the bargaining table. And it works around the world over and over and over again. About every 2 to 3 years, there's a successful civil resistance movement that wins its demands. You can look, the most recent one, or maybe one of the most recent ones 4 years ago just recently in Ecuador, but like literally weeks ago. General strike shut down the capital until their demands were met. But 4 years ago in Puerto Rico, the people of Puerto Rico forced the resignation of their homophobic, corrupt, misogynistic governor. 2 million people went down to the Capitol, sat in the roads for 10, 14 days with a simple demand: you've got to resign. And they forced the resignation of their governor. This is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the thing with the Iraq war protests. Everybody got in the streets, everybody chanted, everybody waved the signs, everybody got back on the buses and went home. That doesn't do the business. You've got to disrupt, shut down the function of government non-violently, day after day after day, until your demand is met. That's what civil resistance is. So
we also have on the line Ray McClendon, the political director of the Georgia NAACP. And of course, with another form of civil action is grassroots organizing. And, on these calls, we have been demanding and advocating grassroots activism for all the way since, our first session. And Tatanka Bricka, who's with us, is very well acquainted with Dolores Huerta and other grassroots organizers. So in addition to civil disobedience, there are two other things. A is grassroots democracy organizing, and the other is general strike. And the ultimate, if Trump had stayed in office, we would have had to have, the only way we would have gotten him out was with a general strike. And we have had general strikes in this country before, but as a historian, I will tell you that the ultimate weapon of the nonviolent left is a general strike. And one of these days we'll have to deal with that. I want to very quickly, we have a gentleman on from Radio Free Galisteo. It is a wonderful radio show. Can you give us a word or two and just tell us about your show? And then we're going to move back into the swing here. We have Tatanka, Jed Pauker, Joel Block, and Eric Lazarus.
Hi, Sluggo. Thanks for recognizing me. This is John Shannon, and I am here in Galisteo, New Mexico, talking to you from Radio Free Galisteo. We've had Sluggo on twice. Last time speaking about Roe v. Wade, and the first time he speaking about the danger of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and the possible destruction of the nuclear power plants there. We're very happy to be participating with all of you. I would encourage all of you to check out our website.
Was there an Adam? Was there an Eve? Or did we evolve from what we conceived? Either way, we got what we needed when the sun shone down on the Garden of Eden.